welcome to the D3D4 Football Podcast with me, your host, James Richards. Right, good morning everyone. Welcome to a rather ad hoc D3D4 Football Podcast put together really just to address what we're seeing in lower league football at the moment, this crisis that is it's been developing over the last few months. As we know, coronavirus stopping play, no fans in stadiums, but this sort of golden nugget that we were holding on to was that we'd see fans back in stadiums in October. Well, yesterday the Prime Minister announced that this would no longer be possible due to the rise in infection rates in the COVID-19 pandemic. And it's left clubs staring down the barrel yet again. And I'm joined this morning to go through our thoughts on this by EFL expert Gabe Sutton. Gabe, welcome to the pod.
Cheers, James. Hope you're keeping okay.
Yeah, well, rather glum, to be honest, because of this. It's football is an escapism, and it's turning into a bit of a nightmare, actually. It really is hitting hard the realities of what's going on in the world, what could happen to the football that we report on and the football clubs we support. So I'm also joined by another EFL expert and excellent writer in Peter Taylor, Bury FC fan, now Bury AFC fan. How you doing, Peter?
Not too bad under the circumstances. Yeah.
Good to see Bury AFC get their campaign started. I don't think they won though, did they? I think was it 2-0 defeat?
2-1 defeat in the FA Vars, yeah.
But good to see them. Where are they playing their games at the moment?
Radcliffe, it's called. It's either Stainton Road or I think it's Neuven Park for sponsorship purposes. So it's still within the metropolitan borough of Bury, but it's not actually in the town itself.
Have there been people at the game? What has been the level of interest in Bury AFC, Peter?
Pretty high, to be honest. I mean, the way it's done at the moment under the COVID restrictions is only 300 can attend any particular game, tops, as in home and away fans, but obviously, most clubs in the Northwest Counties Football League Division 1 North don't have 300 fans. But the level of interest has been pretty high. There's over 1,000 members now of the club. Good. They've sold nearly 2,000 shirts. Obviously, a lot of those are people who probably don't actually support the club, but it's just the novelty is there and the interest is there. So I'd say the interest is quite high. Is it universal amongst people who were just Bury FC fans before? No, it's not. And that might continue for a while when technically Bury FC aren't dead. But, this latest thing probably makes it even harder to see any reasonable, amiable solution to that particular quandary. But yeah, I would say it's been pretty high, and hopefully because I think not being classified as an elite club by the government's classification might still see matches take place, but we'll have to wait and see for certain.
Yeah, let's hope so. But it's just good to see that the Phoenix club is up and running and fans of Bury have a team to support. But we're going to see a lot more of this. Let's be honest, because so no income for clubs since March when the season was cancelled. They've got no fans coming in to watch games whatsoever. A lot of clubs, I think, were really hoping that they could get fans back in October and build it up to at least sort of 30 to 50% capacity crowd and thereafter that. But this has been put on hold. There were some pilots that took place. Shrewsbury, of course, were one of the teams to take part in that. It was very successful. 1,000 fans in to watch their defeat against Northampton. And it all went well. I think a lot of the other ones that had fans in there went well also. But again, this has now been put on hold. So it leaves the EFL looking down the barrel of a 200 million black hole. So many clubs, I think, are going to really struggle to survive. And we're at the point now where I don't see any other option but a rescue package being put together by either the government or a combination of the government and the Premier League. Gabe, first of all, let's get your thoughts on this because, it's a desperate situation, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, last summer when there was that constant uncertainty, and Peter was affected most by this because he was actually a Bury fan. That just that constant uncertainty of clubs like Bury and Bolton, who ultimately were able to continue to exist as a football entity. I was just so worried about those clubs every day, and you're looking at sort of news and whether a takeover is going to happen, and some days you'd get a small step forward where there'd been some progressive talks, and then there'd be a roadblock where, you know, whoever had been interested would discover some of the issues that would put them off buying the club, and that constant sort of state of flux. And now what's happening is not just as a result of not just the case for one or two clubs, but actually for the whole EFL, actually for English football outside the Premier League. There's non-league clubs who are going to be very badly affected as well. So let's not forget that. So it's basically what's happened to Bury and Bolton, what happened to Bury, I suppose, last summer in Bolton, the uncertainty with them. It's now magnified by 100 times, and it is very difficult to be positive as a football fan and as a champion of lower league football or a supporter of lower league football. It's a very hard time to be positive.
It is indeed, and you mentioned non-league clubs. I got a quote here from the owners of Maidstone United. Oliver Ash, I think, is their chairman, and he was just basically saying it's a nightmare. Some clubs will really struggle as they will have contractual issues with players, which are less flexible than others. This is also about furlough ending. And he's saying that some teams will have to withdraw from the league if restrictions on fans continue. So, I mean, I honestly can't see how non-league can start without fans. I saw Maidenhead United, I think it was, also put out a statement saying they wanted it to start because they're at the point of no return now. But I don't see how they do it financially. From our perspective, covering League 1 and 2, I mean, the clubs in League 1 and 2 that may be able to ride this out are teams like Portsmouth, who have got, you know, Michael Eisner with his backing. Mark Palios, the Tranmere owner, said that they have a pot of money which they can fall back on, which was meant for infrastructure projects, but that might just keep them afloat. But, you know, his wife Nicola Palios did say that there are a whole host of clubs who are in a much worse financial situation, Peter. And, you know, am I being a bit of a doomsayer that's saying it could be, you know, we could see a dozen clubs really struggle to survive this?
I think, to be honest, a dozen might be optimistic, to be honest. I've kind of felt like a harbinger of doom myself for over a year, even notwithstanding what happened to Bury FC. I just feel, obviously, from learning a bit more about football finance and people like Kieran Maguire and obviously Andy Holt, the Accrington Stanley chairman's daily morning sermons about football finance well before any pandemic hit, that things were starting to slide anyway in football and in the EFL in particular before all this happened. And there's now arguments about, oh, well, this club will be okay, and this club should have known that this was coming or had their finances in order. I just find it a bit ghoulish, to be honest. And you say about a dozen clubs, I'd say it's a lot more than that. And I was speaking to somebody yesterday, said, like you said, oh, Portsmouth will be fine, Sunderland will be fine. I thought, well, yeah, that's all well and good, but say you know, it does suddenly magically end in March, and fans can attend matches again in good numbers, but who will they be playing against at that point? Each other, because there might not be that many other clubs that are still viable, that haven't withdrawn from the league. So it's really the attitude of, oh, this club will be fine, or the team I support will be fine, and
no, it goes much deeper than that, though, doesn't it?
Disregard the rest it's just got to go now, because it really is going to need a Herculean collective effort from somewhere for the good of the game. Otherwise, it's not going to be a pyramid. It'll just be like a plateau of Premier League teams and some Championship ones, and maybe a smattering of EFL clubs, and that'll be it. That will be the English domestic league from then on.
Yeah, well, Chris Hargreaves, ex-Oxford United midfielder, who is, I think he's the youth team manager at the moment at Bristol Rovers, he tweeted out, "No fans, government, Premier League and FA have to get together quickly and sort a plan. Prem clubs cannot pay 300 to 600k a week wages or spend 50 million and then watch on as other clubs fold. Not acceptable. This is about the game staying intact for everyone's benefit." And I think that's exactly what it is. It is about this pyramid that we treasure staying intact. And I was very disappointed in the comments made by Burnley manager Sean Dyche yesterday, where he tried to allude to the fact that why should big clubs help smaller clubs that are less successful when in other business scenarios you don't see it happen. And he gave the example of a hedge fund that's very successful supporting other hedge funds through a crisis, or a very successful restaurant helping smaller restaurants through crisis. I mean, firstly, those are just, you can't relate those at all, because a big restaurant is not reliant on smaller restaurants to feed its industry at all. It's a completely separate entity. Whereas the Premier League clubs, and Gabe, we spoke about this, and with Burnley specifically. I mean, how many Burnley players have been brought through academies at clubs in the EFL, for example?
Oh, it's ridiculous, James. I mean, Sean Dyche was someone that I kind of looked on as someone who kind of might be someone you'd think would support kind of lower league football, because I think he came through the ranks at Northampton. He was certainly a defender for Millwall and played for a couple of other clubs as well. And you'd think he would be, if anyone in the Premier League can recognise the value of lower league football, you would have thought it would be him. I could accept Pep Guardiola making those kind of comments because you know what his attitude is going to be, but particularly disappointing from Dyche's perspective. I've just got Burnley's squad up at the moment, and looking at the players who off the top of my head have played in the EFL: Nick Pope, Charlie Taylor, Jack Cork, James Tarkowski, Johan Berg Goodmanson, Josh Brownhill, Chris Wood, Ashley Barnes. I could go on here.
Well, hardly any then.
Ashley Westwood, Jay Rodriguez, Will Norris, Phil Bardsley, Mate Vidra, Jimmy Dunn. I mean, there's probably more that I haven't mentioned, but I think you get the idea. Burnley's squad is basically full of players, Bailey Peacock-Farrell, who have played in the EFL. So why would you want to sort of put at risk because I mean, if you're comparing it to a big restaurant, yes, you might want to kind of be fairly charitable, but it's not the same thing because it's not part of the same organisation. Whereas Burnley rely on being able to recruit domestically to be able to continue to compete in the Premier League. So extremely disappointing from Sean Dyche's point of view, I have to say.
Oh, it was just the nature of the comments, which, it doesn't take much thinking. I mean, I don't put myself in the category of someone with high intelligence, for example, but it doesn't take me long to look at that and think, well, that's ridiculous. It doesn't relate to anything. You can't compare the two in any way, shape or form. So the football is its own industry. He's trying to say you have to compare it to other industries because, it's not an industry in its own right and you have to compare it to other businesses. But no, football is a unique thing. The football pyramid and the way it's structured and the way it has organically grown since its beginnings are extremely unique. And I'd say in this country it's extremely unique, whereas in other countries, of course, you get various different sort of structures. And in our country, the way the pyramid has always worked has been something we should be very proud of. So to lose clubs or to have an attitude where a manager of a Premier League club, and may I say Burnley have not been a Premier League club for a huge amount of their recent history. I remember Oxford going there and losing, I think, to a late goal back in, when I was a kid, when they were in the third tier. I mean, it's, they've not been this Premier League club for centuries. I know they've got a great history, but anyway, I don't want to get too involved in this. It's just a disappointing attitude from a manager who I think, like Gabe has suggested, should really know better given the makeup of his squad. And then, Peter, does this give us hope then that the Premier League, I mean, we've got to see someone put pressure on the Premier League to basically come up with a rescue package. And I believe it was part of the agreement for the Premier League to return to play was that they had to help the EFL fund their black hole. And yes, we did get an advance on monies, which was good. That was 125 million back in August, but that's an advance in monies. That's not a rescue package. and that was hopeful of fans returning to stadiums. What are the chances, do you think, Pete, of the Premier League or even the government putting pressure on them to formulate some sort of financial help package?
As regards to the Premier League in and of itself, probably zero, because for a couple of reasons. Firstly, they'll be their own. No, they might not have much sympathy from the outside looking in. There will be their own pressures on their own financial resources, because yes, they obviously have the TV money and all that, but a lot of the clubs, although it's not the majority of their income, still make a lot of money, millions or tens of millions every season from fans actually attending matches. And whilst a lot of them are lumbered with players on multi-year contracts whose salaries are in excess of £100,000 a week, and that probably includes pretty much every single club in the Premier League, then that in itself is not sustainable for the foreseeable future. It might be okay this year, but you can bet that none of those clubs have budgeted probably accordingly for the pandemic to A, be here, and B, continue in such a way that it would, it goes on, say, past next summer or something. So I don't see them doing it by themselves. And as you say, the money that was distributed to EFL and I think the top level of National League clubs, it was an advance. So the key word there is an advance. It was just what they were going to get anyway in the summer, but it was just done slightly before. So I think when that happened, that sort of rung a warning bell or an alarm in my head, thinking, well, yeah, but some clubs are going to, in their best hopes, think, okay, then we'll sort of operate as normal and, do the usual transfer activity, do the usual salaries of players that they try to sign or negotiate new contracts with, and pay agents and all that sort of thing. And unfortunately, we're back in this situation now. I think the most likely way of rescue is probably a combination of political pressure on the Premier League itself, but that has to come firstly from political pressure on the DCMS, the government's Department of Digital, Culture, Media and Sport, because that's the only lever that people have got and stakeholders have got now to really do anything. Because we've seen over the years, well before COVID was a factor, that it's become more of a sliding scale of clubs are up against it outside the Premier League. Clubs even in the Premier League are not making profits necessarily, despite the huge revenue that they get. And so it's going to have to come from outside, and only a groundswell of pressure from every single person who's connected to football, who loves football, is going to make a difference. And even that might not be enough, but at least we'll be able to say that we really tried. I think it's going to have to be through the government itself. But the only thing about that is, of course, that every industry, every sector will be doing exactly the same thing as they did probably at the start of the lockdown in March, or, crying about, not legitimately, I should say, crying about the impact it's going to have on, their livelihoods too. So they might just be in the back of the queue, to be honest.
Indeed. I think, though, it's quite well known that football clubs are more than just businesses. They are
absolutely
the hub of their community. I think they, for a lot of people, and maybe I'm generalising here, but I would say young men especially, it's a part of your routine, and it's a very important part of people's mental well-being. Growing up, football was always a refuge for me. Even as young as 15, I would be on my own taking the train up to Oxford matches on a weekend, when hardly any of my friends at school would even take much of an interest in football other than perhaps watching Match of the Day in the evening. I was off up to the Manor Ground on the train at 11 a.m. on a Saturday morning, getting back about 9 p.m. and that was my routine on a weekend when I was a kid. And I do think that if anything happens to some of these clubs, the impending catastrophe for how people will deal with it and people's mental well-being and mental health will be very severe. And I hope that we can put pressure on. I think everyone, we have a whole army of people on Twitter who can sort of try and put pressure on Oliver Dowden. I mean, he is on Twitter. I did a tweet this morning where I'm trying to say, look, guys, we have to do something, and it has to be done quickly, because this crisis is already at a very dangerous tipping point, because clubs are already spent, I think, the money that they're advanced. They have no income now at all. I mean, we're talking fans coming back at the earliest at late March next year. I mean, that's basically a whole season without money. No club, I don't think, unless they have a very rich owner, can survive without that. And I don't know what else we can do. I mean, we are just fans who are very concerned about the future of the game that we love, Gabe. But I mean, what would you say as a message to people who, are out there listening to this? What can they do to try and help produce that groundswell of support and pressure we need to get something done here?
Well, I think the first thing I would say is I do think we have to politicise football now. I've for a long time understood the view and kind of felt it myself that, maybe we want to keep politics aside from football, because football's something that can sort of unite us as football. It's something that kind of helps us get along. And sometimes if we bring the political division, the controversy into it, that isn't healthy. But actually, I think at the moment, football no longer represents escapism from the realities of the world that we live in at the moment, because it's actually facing the same issues. So I do think we have to politicise football and actually I think we might have spoken about this off air, and actually tweet our local MPs who have a bit of status perhaps to be able to kind of raise this as a bit wider political issue. And I think if we all do that, then maybe we can sort of generate some traction as a movement. But I have faith in football to continue to exist. But I don't know what it's going to look like in 10 years' time. I've got a feeling it might look wildly different to the structure that we see at the moment. So I think really it's up to us fans, unfortunately. We can't wait for the FA and the Premier League to start to become altruistic. We have to force a movement ourselves, whether that's by bringing politics into it, or even if the worst does happen to lots of clubs due to the greed at the top of the game, maybe as fans we're going to have to rebuild the game. Either way, it's going to need movement from fans. It's going to need us all to kind of come together and rebuild the game that we love, really.
Desperate times. It really is. The way we're talking, it does feel like there's not a huge amount of hope here. I mean, there's not much we're doing at the moment. I mean, the only income that clubs are getting at the moment is from iFollow. We've already discussed, I think, on Twitter how iFollow is disadvantaging smaller clubs majorly, and Andy Holt's been a big sort of naysayer of it since it began, because he was always highlighting how this doesn't help clubs. But Colchester United put out in a statement on their website a breakdown, didn't they, of just how difficult it is for small clubs to make money off selling iFollow tickets. And a lot of fans saying, well, it's down to Colchester to make sure that they sell them to their own fans, and why should customers of other clubs see their money go to the side playing at home when it's all online? Well, there is an argument there of saying, yes, if you're a Tranmere fan and you're watching your team play on iFollow, you want your cash to go to Tranmere Rovers. I understand that. But it doesn't, for me, make sense when you think about it in what a football match usually would look like. So if Colchester hosted a big team like Bolton live, you'd expect to see 2,000 Bolton fans in the away end, all of which, apart from a 5% commission on sales, would go to the side hosting the match. Why should it be any different on iFollow? I understand that the costs are lower because you're not hosting a crowd, but you still have a high cost of hosting a match at that venue. And I don't see why any difference should take place there. They only in the end get the revenue of the first 500 away tickets sold. Bolton sold 2,252 for the iFollow on Saturday. Colchester sold I was surprisingly low number of 452, though a lot of Colchester fans were saying, well, there was 5 of us watching it on one TV, so it's one pass for 5 fans who would normally all go and buy a ticket. So you can see how quickly numbers buying passes diminish when there is a congregation of people watching it together. But it did leave Colchester out of pocket. I think they received, was it about 8,000, something like that?
in comparison with something like 54,000, I seem to remember that Robbie Cowling saying he would have expected to have
got from
gained.
a match.
Yeah, so just
and I think I don't know how much Bolton made. Was it 14,000 Bolton made from the?
Something along those lines, I think. Yeah,
it was, wasn't it? It was something like, I can't remember. I haven't got it up in front of me, but it was something like 14,000 made by Bolton and only 8,000 made by Colchester, whereas they would normally make 54,000 from a match. So, it just highlights this huge disparity, this huge black hole opening up. I just wish things could be fairer. And I know fans always say, well, I want my money to go to my club, but you'll have those home games, of course. So every home game that your club has, as is per usual in a football season, all the money would go to them. I think that's a much better model, but it is a side issue I follow, because the sort of sums you're talking about there are far below what you get from a match day. I mean, you're talking about, was it £20,000 or so, even if they got the entire amount of money, Colchester, compared to 54,000 for hosting a game. So it's a huge disparity. But yes, we want to get fan opinion on this. So when I release this podcast, please reply with your thoughts below about what you think should happen, what you hope will happen, your fears. Share your thoughts on your fears for your club, because there are a lot of clubs in the leagues that we cover, especially that are going to be at a huge risk here. Damien Collins, we've obviously had him on the podcast before, had a plan where the government could step in to save clubs that are in trouble. I have a feeling, though, Peter, that plan may not be appropriate in the situation that we're seeing at the moment, because literally the government would have to be involved in nearly every club, wouldn't they?
Yeah, I think so, and I just don't see with probably how stretched they're going to be. Not that I have that much sympathy with the government, but again, there's going to be lots of industries wanting the same thing. So I just don't see that plan's sustainable anymore, and we just have to come up with something better as fans of the game ourselves now, I think, and very quickly, unfortunately.
Well, I agree.
I kind of think that if the worst does happen and lots of other clubs go out of business in the way that we've unfortunately seen with Bury and everything that Peter's had to go through, and I think that's not getting over that won't be a quick process if things do happen as we fear. But I've got a feeling we might have in 10 years' time a new fan set up governing body where football actually starts out as kind of like almost an amateur game, a bit like it did sort of in the late 1800s, where actually fans are coming together and starting up clubs, and the economy of football becomes very different if the sort of the Premier League kind of becomes kind of cut off from the rest. Because I don't think, what I can't see happening, there's a lot of uncertainties at the moment, but what I can't see happening is clubs going out of business, numerous clubs, and fans saying, well, that's it for football then. I think that there's a spirit among fans that means football won't die. It's just we don't know what form it's going to take. So that's if we want to kind of a brighter, more positive note, that would be my 2 pence on that front.
Yeah, I mean, I do hope, personally, I see your point, but I really do hope it doesn't get to that. Because, you'd lose some very big clubs and some great histories, and I don't think the game is yet beyond rescuing if people in power make correct decisions and, like you say, stop being greedy. It is about greed to a certain extent, all this. So I don't know. It's going to be a very difficult period ahead. I will try and get some thoughts and opinions of maybe people behind the scenes running clubs at the moment to sort of find out how difficult a situation they are actually in and what they're trying to do just to bridge gaps and keep themselves running. But I do fear for clubs that don't have rich benefactors, and even those who do have rich benefactors, a lot of them will have their own business issues at the moment, and I think a lot of them will be very stretched to meet the costs of running a football club. We've seen Bury go, we've seen Macclesfield go, we've seen Southend look like they are in all sorts of trouble. And I'm not suggesting all of this is down to COVID, because clearly this is down to bad ownership in a lot of cases. But again, that's down to poor governance, and it's something we need to see change. Do either of you have any last comments before we leave this? Because really, I think the time has come for all I can do with D3D4 is try and create a bit of swell of opinion and pressure to make people aware that fans shouldn't put up with this. We really shouldn't put up with this. But I don't know. Any final comments? I'll start with you, Peter. Is there any last sort of thing you want to say before we go?
Just two quick things, really, which I just want to state. Firstly, it was kind of funny in an ironic way yesterday, where there was this MK Dons fan talking about, who's the marquee signing that they need to get to replace Reece Healy? And I just thought, unfortunately, I mean, any other year it might have been, I could suggest someone. And I thought, wake up! I mean, look what's happening.
Yeah.
Seriously, look what's happening. I mean, you'd be lucky, unfortunately, if MK Dons are still a thing in a year. Never mind, who's going to bang in the goals. And I didn't say it in a disparaging way. It's just kind of think that mentality about who a club should sign or whatever just has to go now, basically. And secondly, more importantly, I would say, and I have had some success in this in recent past, but either lobby your local MP. There's an easy way to find out who your local MP is. There's a website for it because they work for you if you don't already know, or lobby the people who are either in the DCMS, which is Oliver Dowden, or the shadow minister for it, which is Joe Stevens for Labour.
Sorry, can I just ask Peter what the DCMS stands for? It's not. I've heard the name.
Digital Culture, Media and Sport.
Okay, thank you.
It's the committee. So Oliver Dowden is the Secretary of State for the Digital Culture, Media and Sport.
Yeah.
And they are the ones who have the power to put political pressure on, for example, the Premier League to start putting together some sort of financial package to help the EFL. I can't see any other way of teams surviving without political pressure, like you mentioned, Gabe. But sorry, Peter, and you were just mentioning about pressure on local
just saying, Oliver Dowden, who's the actual Conservative government minister, Secretary of State for it. Joe Stevens is the Labour shadow, and Jamie Stone is the Lib Dem shadow. So whichever political party you support or think it's going to get most done, then just try to lobby them, because they'll be aware of it. But if they see a groundswell of opinion, and more importantly, if you actually got some ideas to contribute, then it might snowball into something. I would encourage it.
That's really useful. Thank you.
Yeah, we'll start that up once this pod is out. I'll try and get something put together on Twitter, and we can all try and push for this. We'll add all of those names you've just mentioned as well, Peter, because something has got to be done. I'm very reluctant just to sit on my hands and watch this happen in front of me. Football has been so important to me ever since I was a kid. I mean, like I said, it was an escapism from any sort of troubles I'd ever had. And being an Oxford fan, it's quite unique from where I was from, because apart from a few Portsmouth and Southampton supporters, no one supported Oxford. No one at all knew who they were. So it was a very unique experience, and it's obviously something that I was passed down to me by my father. He grew up in Oxford, so that's why he started supporting them before they were even called Oxford United. In fact, they were Headington United back in the day. So, and I'm sure all of us have very similar stories about family members getting us into the game, and so it is so important that we try and do something here. It's not going to be easy, and it may be futile, but if it's better to be trying to do something than not doing anything at all. And Gabe, any last comments from you?
Just kind of, I guess check in with your mates would be one thing that I'd say, because I think, we've touched upon this earlier, like football is such a massive, it's massive economically, it's massive socially, but it's also really important mentally in terms of, it can be an antidote to the problems that we have in our lives. So and it's kind of been a constant as well. So I think to have that kind of thrown into doubt makes things really difficult for all of us. So I would just say sort of check in with your mates and kind of let's sort of stick together and help us get through this period and sort of deal with whichever challenges are going to be thrown at us. But yeah, we've got to stick together because it's such an uncertain time, very worrying time, and we need the support of one another.
Yeah, and the one thing I would say is all football fans should unite behind this sort of appeal to get clubs rescued. I think we all enjoy rivals with each other, and it can develop into sort of petty arguments on Twitter and stuff like that. Let's throw all of those out the window here. Let's get I'm as eager to see Oxford United survive this crisis as I am Swindon, because we are all football clubs. We all are communities. We need each other. I enjoy the rivalry with Swindon. I'd hate to see another club who are our bitter rivals disappear. It's just wrong. So all fans should get behind this and try and put pressure on. Get your clubs to express their need and put out statements. I mean, we need it to become so apparent. I think football has carried on. I think one of the problems with this is football has carried on almost as normal, and that, like Peter suggested with the MK Dons fan, has led to fans not really understanding the peril that they are now in. It really is serious. We could lose a huge number of clubs, and also just the structure of the game. Breaking down below EFL down to non-league could just fall apart, and it would be a tragedy. But if you've enjoyed listening to this, please give it a retweet, but more importantly, get behind our support of trying to put pressure on to get some movement, some traction on a support package for the lower leagues. But thank you for listening. Gabe, thank you for your contributions, mate.
Well, I'd say it's my pleasure, but it's a tough topic to tackle, really. But no, I'm glad to be on and be of any help to your podcast, because you do a great job with it. So thanks for having me.
No problem at all. Thank you, Gabe. And Peter as well, thank you for coming on, because for you personally, I think you sort of have a better knowledge than all of us of what it's like to lose a club.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me on. And yeah, that's right. And I just want hope against hope that's just not repeated for any other sport or any other club. That's what my aim will be to help to avoid.
Let's hope we can do it. So thank you for listening, and and get behind this cause and start badgering your local MPs, start badgering people on the DCMS as well, because we need something sorted sooner rather than later. Until our next podcast, though, we bid you farewell.